So welcome to the first webinar in the Practical Library Assessment Series from the NY3Rs Association. I'm Jessica Brooks, the Educational Services Librarian at South Central Regional Library Council in beautiful, sunny Ithaca, New York. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, you can type them into the question area of your command module, and Denise will be answering those questions at the end of the session. So now I would like to introduce Mary Carol Lindblom, the Executive Director of SCRLC. Mary Carol will tell us more about this webinar series and introduce today's speaker. So good afternoon, Mary Carol.
Hi, Jessica, and welcome everyone. And indeed, we are having a beautiful sunny day here in Ithaca, and I hope it's beautiful wherever you are. This is our very first webinar in an assessment series, and altogether there will be at least 10 webinars between, well, now and then October, and a lot of them will be coming up in the early part of the summer. And then we'll take a bit of a summer break. And the assessment series comes to you from the new the NY3Rs Association.inc. And for those of you who are not familiar with the NY3Rs, probably the best thing is to go to our website at ny3rs.org. And if you click on the maroon-colored New York State icon, you'll go to 6 initiatives that grew out of a process that started a few years ago, actually, on information infrastructure and assessment and return on investment. It was a common thread through a summit that we had, a survey that we did, focus groups, a reality check meeting. And so this is the continuing education component, but we will also have a repository, and then we may follow up this next year with a bit of a pilot project. It's yet to be determined. And so I'm not going to ramble on too much about that, but you can visit the ny3rs.org and learn such fascinating facts as what do the 3 R's stand for? What are those R's? Hint, research, resource, and reference. And also how the 9 councils, like South Central Regional Library Council, fit into all of that, to that mix. Yeah. Okay, so we are so happy to have with us Denise Davis. And I've known of Denise for a very long time because South Central was involved with my InfoQuest, the text reference project, and so was Sacramento Public. And so I've been kind of following what Sacramento was doing for a while. I have. And then I got to meet Denise briefly at the Library Assessment Conference last August that was held out in Seattle. And so I've been viciously plotting to get her here in some capacity to do something because, and I'm not going to spend time reading her biography because you have that information, but I would like to introduce her as the Deputy Director of Sacramento Public Library, and she has been involved in a multitude of assessment-related activities on a national level, and that is outlined in her bio as well. So without further ado, Denise, I am turning this over to you.
Well, thank you, Mary Carol. Good morning, or actually it's morning for me, it's afternoon for you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased that I can work with you today to help kick off this assessment series. I think it's really important, and I'm just back from Washington, D.C., where I was at a leadership summit where assessment was the #1 topic. I've been told that my mic is very sensitive, and you may hear the fan of my laptop computer in the background, and I apologize for that, but consider it white noise. So what I'm hoping to do today is to get through three activities during the session. It's going to take me about 40 minutes to get through everything. But a lot of what I'm talking about today actually comes to you with me wearing my hat as the chair of the Public Library Association's Presidential Task Force on Performance Measures. And I'll actually be referencing some of the tools that they've developed throughout my session so that you have something to ground what I'm talking about. The first element of the session is what exactly is assessment and why should I do it and how will it help my library. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about outputs, which we're all very good at collecting, but also moving towards outcomes and ultimately into performance measurement for your library. Some easy how-tos on how to get started and aligning what you can add to what you're collecting with what you're already reporting, possibly to your state library. And actually the example I'm using relates to the Public Library Survey in New York State. And then also some basic outcomes questions that you can add to what you're already collecting to get a better picture. And then some things to be aware of to be successful in measurement. Primarily just, it's the KISS issue, keep it simple. But also planning, measuring, refining your programs and services as a result of what you've collected, and then just measuring again to see if you've achieved what your outcome was. So what is assessment? Assessment is very simple. It's really the process of valuing a library service, and the purpose is to understand the value or impact of a service to an individual or a community. We do this in many ways, but the key here is actually moving from outputs to outcomes. So what's an output? An output is really helping us understand what patrons do when they're in the library, but it's a quantitative measure, it's not a qualitative measure. And by that I mean we're collecting circulation, visits, program attendance, how resources that the library owns and makes available to the public are actually used by the public. In addition, we're capturing information about the overall capacity of the organization. Hours open, collection size, budgets, staffing. Outputs are typically captured on a regular basis and they're reported as part of your annual state survey. They may also be reported on a regular basis to your board or your stakeholder groups. And libraries often use these outputs internally to understand whether they're meeting internal benchmarks. But again, this is an output. What it lacks is the patron feedback component. It's really, outputs are internally focused and they help you understand what the load is within your organization. Outcomes, on the other hand, really inform us about the user of the service and whether their goals or expectations of the service have been met by the organization. Outcomes could be both reflective of a change in a person or a change in a service as a result of the user feedback. So the user attends a program, gets a benefit, and then the outcome is that they actually increase the skill, awareness, or knowledge, and I'll talk about that a bit more. User feedback is really the critical piece, and ultimately what the outcome is measuring is the change in the user, and that's what is the most critical piece to be measured, is the change in the user. So ask yourselves, did the patron receive benefit from the program or service? Where assessment helps us understand this is it measures the extent to which your program or service did any of the following. Did it change the behavior of the patron, their attitude, their skills, their knowledge, their condition or status? So what might this be? A behavior might be, and we're going to use this as an example in a minute, reading more frequently to your child. Behavioral changes with the parent or caregiver, the benefit goes to the child. Ultimately, the outcome is that you wanted to change the behavior of the parent or the caregiver. Someone's attitude about access to information, you're changing, you're providing a service or a program that's helping influence the perception of the user. The user's attitude changed. They became more skilled in an activity. Increasing a patron's knowledge, it could be a lifelong learning program that you have, or a student achievement. You're doing an instruction class in a high school or in a college setting, and what you're trying to do is increase the knowledge of the individual participating. You give your program, but you need to get the feedback from the patron or the student or the user in order to understand whether you were successful in meeting your goals. And condition or status really falls into more of a life skills or a civic engagement activity with the user. So this might include a job skills class, learning basic job-seeking skills, how to complete an application, even how to set up an email account so one could apply for a job. That could potentially change the condition or the status of the individual. The feedback from the user about whether they were successful in their activity, job-seeking activity, helps you understand whether you've met your outcome. Okay. So, getting started, I did a lot of reviewing of the 3 R's report on assessment to get a sense of what your goals were as an organization. And also, I looked at the state library survey that you have within New York State. I spent a little time with that, and then I also looked at what the PLA Project Outcome, as it's now called, the Performance Measures Project, has actually identified. And I'm going to use one of their test surveys as an example today. So combined library outputs and patron feedback really create the entire assessment picture, and they help you put a plan together that includes outcome levels for almost any type of service. These are onboarding surveys. They're meant to be very simple. They're meant to be usable at even the smallest library, and they're meant to be replicated. So you can use the survey over and over again or make certain modifications to some of the questions in order to gather information over a series of programs, per se. What makes this information powerful is that it takes your output information that you have, how many books are you buying, how many hours are you open, how many programs are you having, and it combines that with the patron feedback about how successful the program was in meeting the goals or objectives of the individual who participated. Bringing those two together helps you put together a full picture of the value of the program, which you can then articulate to your community. So, let's think a little bit about the process. The goal here is that what you want to do is identify 1 or 2 broad service areas that you can assess in order to understand the value of that program or service to your community. Again, you want to keep it simple. The PLA outcome surveys, again, support a series of areas. I'm only using one today, but the areas that are covered are civic and community engagement, digital inclusion, early childhood literacy, which is the one I'm going to use as an example today, economic development, education and lifelong learning, job skills, and then another summer reading, because PLA felt that as a national program for public libraries, it was important to have a survey for that series. So, key here is get your basic outputs together that you're currently reporting, set those aside, and then align your assessment strategy using existing outputs to report, additional performance feedback from your patrons, students, or faculty, and then establish a 360-degree perspective on specific services that you've identified for assessment. The example I'm using today is early literacy. This comes from what I read in the 3 R's report, and I think it aligns pretty well with student achievement as a key component. And I think also that looking at early childhood literacy would resonate with pretty much anybody because you understand the value of it in your community. So the question to answer is, did the parent or caregiver attending, quote, how to read to your toddler program, gain confidence reading to a toddler? So the key outcome here is increased confidence in reading to the toddler. So that's the outcome you want to achieve, and that's what we're going to be gathering information about in order to answer that question. So where do you start? You can start with your annual report of public and association libraries. There are actually definitions in the survey itself. There are questions 3.1 through 3.64, library-sponsored programs that specifically articulate early literacy programs. So you're already reporting outputs in your state library annual report. So this is great. There's nothing new you have to capture because you're already capturing this. Again, keep it simple. If you already have the data, don't try and capture data that is unnecessary. Having this information will help you focus on early literacy programming, and then from that you can move into the outcomes component. The assumptions about early literacy programming is that it's geared to the parent or the caregiver. It teaches the parent or the caregiver skills to meet early literacy needs of youth. And the outputs that you're going to capture are already captured regularly as part of your annual report requirements, and also something that you're probably reporting pretty regularly to your board or stakeholders, and the staff are using internally. Additional outputs to consider: program date, time, and location. Program attendance, if possible, grouped by age ranges, and if possible, also isolating adults attending with children as opposed to adults only. This does happen sometimes in library programming, where you have individuals who, pregnant mothers, who are wanting to learn skills, they don't yet have a child. So keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons for this. And also circulation. Depending upon your integrated library system, you may be able to get very detailed information about the patron type and the material type to understand specifically where in your collection what moved, and align that with the dates of the programs that were offered. So there's a great deal of detail that you can capture from resources you already have. Now you may be asking, okay, why do I need the program date, time, and location? You want that information at the ready, because if you're doing a patron feedback survey to a specific program, and part of the feedback you get is, this would be really great if it were on a Tuesday instead of a Thursday, and if it were in the afternoon instead of at 10 o'clock in the morning, you can then go back and say, oh, when I look at our programming, the bulk of our programming for teaching parents and caregivers how to read to toddlers are typically in the morning. But we have patrons who are saying they really want these services in the afternoon because it would be more accessible to them. So that's why it's important to have that information. The next piece is gathering the patron feedback. So using draft surveys developed by the PLA task force, again, there's a whole range of surveys. The surveys are about 5 questions long. They ask very specific questions about behavior and skills, but they're very easy to use. I'm not going to push through to this link, but I encourage you to click through and actually see some of the draft surveys. You'll see some of the detail in just a moment. So this is the survey for the early childhood literacy. All of the questions in the series have range responses. We use a Likert range for these. So what you're understanding is the extent to which the individual participating learns something new that they can share with their child using the first question. Their response option is not so much to very much. So you have about a 5-point scale on this. Also, you're able to find out whether they feel more confident in helping their children learn, and will they spend more time with their children reading, singing, talking, writing, and playing, the grounding pieces of early childhood literacy. Also, you're able to ask in this survey, are they more aware of the resources and services provided by the library? So those are the top 4 questions. And within that set, across the different categories of surveys that have been prepared by PLA, civic engagement, digital inclusion, and so on, the questions are aligned pretty much like this, with a focus on whatever the specific category or topic is. But we're asking very similar questions here. And then the last 2 questions, 5 and 6, are really for the staff to understand what the individual liked most about the program, and what could the library do to improve their children's literacy. So this is narrative feedback that comes back to the library. The first 4 questions are scored in a Likert range. You see across the bottom the response ranges are strongly agree to strongly disagree, and then a non-applicable. So the importance of the feedback is that you're allowing the patron to give you detail on the value of the program to the individual at that point in time. And that's really critical to understand, because asking the survey across similar programs over time may yield a very broad range of feedback. So you want to gather it all and really consider all of it in a corpus, and not really focus on 1 or 2 comments. You're really looking for trends. Ultimately, you're still trying to answer the baseline question, which was, did the parent or caregiver attending How to Read to a Toddler program report increased confidence in reading to the toddler? So that's the purpose of gathering this information. When you apply this survey, say you have a series of surveys to engage a parent or caregiver in becoming more comfortable with reading and engaging with their children to see if behavior changes over time, you can use these surveys by doing a simple alteration in the questions. For instance, I will spend more time with my children reading, singing, playing, writing, etc. You can change that to ask, are you spending more time with your children reading, singing, writing, playing, and so on. So that for families that come to multiple programs that are designed to be in a series, you can make minor tweaks to the survey to begin capturing what we would consider longitudinal data. So you're asking the same people over a series of programs questions that help you understand whether the incremental changes you're making in the programming to build their confidence levels and their skills in this area are actually being effective with the patrons who are attending. So using the same approach, you can answer questions about a variety of services, everything from early literacy through meeting Common Core learning standards, etc. So for instance, did high school students attending programs supporting whatever the specific Common Core learning area is report increased confidence locating or using primary resources? A goal of Common Core is use of primary resources. The outcome is you want to understand whether the individuals who participated in the program or training actually reported increased confidence in locating and using the primary resources. That's your outcome. And the patron feedback is going to tell you whether your program was designed in such a way to support that, was it the right staff person to do the program, and so on. So we've done all this data collection. You have your outputs. You have your outcome data because you've used surveys. You've gotten patron feedback. Now, what do you do with all of it? So you have to compile it. On the PLA side, those surveys will, in June, be available online. During the test period, they were online, and Count Opinions company actually supported the testing of those surveys. And a lot of what was made available to us was very meaningful because on the back end, the surveys were aligned in an array. And by an array, I mean each survey had its own table, so you could see the input from each of the patron feedback forms. So you have the option of using these surveys either in paper, if that's the simplest way for you to administer, or online. And then the patron inputs their responses, goes right into a database, which you have available. This is not dissimilar from other tools that academic libraries have access to. For instance, the Association of Research Libraries LibQual Plus tool. This is a gap analysis tool that academic libraries use that actually allow for ingesting of the data immediately, and different academic institutions handle it differently, perhaps only focusing on first semester freshmen in higher education and asking about their experience in the library. But that database, it's only a database, it's not in paper, whereas the PLA tools were allowing libraries to use whichever format is most appropriate for them. So in the absence of this being available, at a minimum you could set up a pretty quick Excel spreadsheet or even a Word table to key in the data if you have staff who can do that, if you have the time, or volunteers perhaps who can help you with that. So what I'm going to show you now is just a very simple Excel table that I created for the purpose of this presentation so that you understand really how easy this is. So this is the table, and this is the Early Childhood Literacy Survey from PLA. The questions are in the first column, and the response options are columns across the top. And I've simply, again, for purposes of example, I've included the total number of respondents who strongly agreed with, I learned something new that I can share with my children. So 7 individuals reported that they strongly agreed. 3 reported they agreed. 2 reported neither agreed nor disagreed. there were no comments because this is just a Likert range question, no comments. The comments appear at the bottom with the what did you like most about the program. I've colored out the columns that are the range responses so that you can just move directly to the comments. And then I've just made up some comments that I thought patrons might have. So, you know, often offer earlier in the day, my baby naps at 1 o'clock. Those are the kind of questions that, responses that you're going to get. And I know this because Sacramento actually tested these surveys, and these were the sort of responses that we received from our patrons. So you have this, and then what you could do is as you build out the survey responses, you can add the date and time of the surveys, of the dates and times of the programs and the surveys received, so you can capture the data over time and just, you know, keep multiple tabs, and they can just sum them across the bottom, the last row. Again, something very straightforward, easy to set up in Excel if you want to begin capturing this yourselves and to really move this along. Again, keep it simple. You want this to be very easy for you. Okay. Some other online tools, again, this is not an endorsement, but I am going to mention some other outcomes tools that are available to you. Counting Opinions has a product called LibSat. It's a customer satisfaction survey. And a number of libraries in Canada and the US are using this to understand how well patrons are engaging with both their services and their facilities to get user feedback. They also have other utilities in their portfolio that allow you to do custom surveys, but the LibSat survey really is a customer satisfaction survey, and the metrics are fairly similar between Canada and the U.S. The other that I've already mentioned for academic libraries is a LibQual+. It's, again, a gap analysis tool for academic libraries, and it really measures the gap between the perceived service and the student and faculty expectation of the service, so that libraries can understand how well they're meeting faculty and student expectation. That is all online. So, working with the results. So you bring together the outputs. You've got your attendance information, your program hours, and the resources that you had to acquire to make the program possible. And then you have your outcomes component, which is your patron feedback. So what do the data tell you? Well, they tell you a lot, in fact. Looking at the data, you can begin to understand whether there are areas for improvement in the programming or service that you were assessing. And is it possible that with some minor changes, or sometimes major changes, you can move the patrons to a higher level of change in either their behavior, their attitude, their skills, their knowledge, condition, or status. Do the results actually tell a story that's both meaningful to you and to your stakeholders? Good or bad, you're going to learn something about your program or service. You really need to be open to the feedback. Sometimes this is painful because, it's ugly baby syndrome. You have a program or a service that you've been providing for a very long time. You've put a lot of energy and effort into it, but it's maybe not exactly what the community needs any longer. And you have to be prepared to begin shifting and so on. And this is where outcome measurement can really help you understand that. Maybe you aren't reaching the target audience because of the probation day or time of the program. You may get feedback that says, oh, I'd love to go to that program, but it's at a location. I have to take mass transit. It's not easy for me to get there. I'd really love to attend that program. The time during the day is not convenient. The day isn't convenient. Those kinds of things. Or there's no parking. I can't actually go there and park. You may also discover in the feedback that maybe it's the wrong person on staff actually doing this programming. And that is sometimes the most painful thing to hear because you have people who are really wedded to the programs that they're providing, but they may not be the best people to offer that program. So you need to be prepared to accept that feedback and experiment a bit with what you learn in order to understand, if you're able to increase the outcome on the part of the patron. Can you increase the benefit to them and their success as a result of participating in your programming. And if that means changing staff doing the program, you'll need to do that. Now, if you're in a small location and you only have 2 or 3 people who do programming, then you need to think a little differently maybe about how you deliver the program. So you don't have the option of having a different person actually handle the program, but you do have the option of changing how you present the program. And that's where the feedback comes in. The other piece is, and this is always hard, is letting go of a program. You may find that, yeah, attendance has always been low. We've never had more than 4 or 5 people attending a particular program. That may be an indicator that the program was never very healthy and really wasn't targeting correctly. So a question you have to grapple with is it time to sunset the program or the service? And this feedback from the community will help you understand that, so that you can make logical decisions about how you're scaling your programming and services to really meet the needs of the community. Again, sometimes very, very painful actions, but things you need to do. So, the data loop. So you've identified your categories, your service areas. You've wanted to assess to understand the value to the community. You've gathered your output data, visits, circulation, all of that. You've conducted your patron surveys to understand the outcome levels that you've been achieving with the programs and services as they currently are. You come back from gathering that information. You make the changes to the services based on the patron feedback and what staff can actually accommodate. You go back out, you make your modifications, you go back out, and you survey again to see if you've hit the target there. Have you made the kinds of adjustments or course corrections in the program or service to engage a patron more effectively and increase their success in attending your programs? This isn't about staff being successful. This is about the patron being successful. You review the results again to see if you've gotten any movement. You get the feedback. Okay, yeah, that one change was good. We changed the day perhaps of the week. That worked. We still have some issues over here. We did increase attendance. So that's good, so we're reaching more people. You may have decided to go out and do more outreach activities as a result of the feedback, so you're gathering technically from a different group, but you're going to pull all that together to really understand, we've made these changes, were the changes the correct changes to make, and did it really result in greater success on the part of the patron participating in the program and increasing their skills and abilities. And then you look at it and say, okay, this is great. Some of the things you're going to get from the patron feedback are the anecdotal, really great success stories. I learned so much by coming to these programs because it was always difficult for me to find time to reach my child. But now I understand how critical it is for me to reach my child 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day if possible, but 10 minutes a day. So important that I do that. I get that now. I am a better parent. I'm a better caregiver because I attended your program. Those are the stories that you're going to get from the patrons who participate. There's always some little nugget from any program that you offer that's going to be your talking point. And that's how you're going to help tell your story to your stakeholders. I heard an interesting quote earlier this week from someone who had worked with a library up in Toronto. And she referenced the term stakeholder as putting a stake through the heart of something or actually staking it up. And I thought that was so amazing because it really does make the difference. You can persuade a stakeholder that what you're doing is really important, or you can dissuade a stakeholder and that person can shut you down. And this is where these success stories become really, really critical. So you're going to combine that with, oops, let me go back. You're going to combine that with all of the data you have plus the patron story. And that's where that's really where the powerful story comes. So I want to talk a little bit about the data loop in terms of focusing on small incremental steps. I mean, I've outlined them here, identify the program and so on. And it's about repeating it. It's about going back in and saying, okay, we made these changes, but it's important that I keep understanding that the programs are successful. It isn't so much that you want to capture information just for the sake of capturing it. You really want to use this once you have a baseline set and you really understand the input from the community about your program or service. What you want to do is use these as temperature gauges moving forward. So the first round of this may seem a little daunting because you're just putting your toe in the water and really trying to figure out what's going to work for your library. But after you get the method in place, it really should be just something that you do. It should be part of your culture. And keeping it simple helps you do that because you're not throwing yourself in and being completely overwhelmed by trying to capture too much information and being scattered. You just have to focus on a really small area and be successful in that. Working through the process, building your skills in capturing the information, really listening to your community, but capturing it in a systematic way, not just, oh, I happened to talk to a patron after a program and they told me they really loved it. That's fine, but that's not assessment. Assessment is capturing as much information as you can from all the individuals that are participating and doing it in a consistent way. And that's what the PLA surveys will help with. And that's what the ARL instrument helps with and other tools that are out there. So that you're doing consistent data capture, you're standing back, you're looking at it, and you're using the process over and over again. So it's work through this, review the results, and then repeat the process again. Okay. Now I want to shift a little bit. I've got about 5 or 10 minutes left of talking. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I want to move on to talk about some other national research that is about outcomes. And the caveat here is that I've lifted this text from their websites so that you have a snapshot of what some of these tools are and these national assessment activities. So the first is the EDGE initiative, and this is a rather rigorous project that was trying to get a handle on the impact of public access computing in public libraries. They had developed a fairly easy-to-use tool of assessment where libraries would measure there would be output measures. So how many public computers do you have? What's your broadband speed? What service areas, content areas are you making available through your website or online databases? Are staff trained to provide public access computing support to the public, and so on. This is not an outcomes tool. This is an outputs tool. But what it helps you understand is where your gaps are in reaching your community, because it takes your data and it compares it with libraries all over the country, and especially within your state. So it helps you understand where you rank compared with your peers, and it gives you a score. The score helps you determine how you're actually going to process and improve service. So the other element of the EDGE initiative is they spent a great deal of time putting together toolkits that help you use data to tell your story. So when you think about the PLA surveys that are out there with regard to outcomes under the Project Outcome initiative, there are other resources out there like the EDGE initiative that will also provide support in helping you tell the story. So Project Outcome isn't the only such project out there, so that's why I wanted you to understand that. Okay, the next is the Digital Inclusion Survey. This is a survey that's been conducted under various names over the last, 15 or 20 years by Giancarlo Berto, who's currently at the University of Maryland College Park. And John has been capturing information from public libraries. Many of you, I'm sure, have participated in this survey over the years. And what this data links is what your public computing capacity is. So how many computers do you have? Are you benefiting from federal discounts on technology? How are services being provided through this technology? This is more the nuts and bolts of public computing in public libraries, and the data from these studies have actually informed the Federal Communications Commission around E-rate discounts, and it's really used at both a state and national level to ensure that public libraries have adequate capacity. they've really used this data for a policy perspective. For libraries, what's important here is it helps you understand the extent to which you're doing computer refresh or you're investing sufficiently in your infrastructure, because you can look at yourself compared with other libraries in your state and also nationally. Between the prior studies and this digital inclusion survey is that John has put together actually a great map. So there is an interactive mapping tool that takes your data, once you've responded to the survey, it takes your data and it maps your data. So you can actually use those maps as part of your story that you're telling stakeholders. So if part of your outcomes activities perhaps are around digital inclusion or even job skills training, and you're trying to increase your ability to provide support to individuals who are job seekers at all levels, school age through adult, but you don't have sufficient bandwidth. What this mapping tool helps you do is present that information so that the stakeholder understands that, in a 1 or 2 mile radius of your library, there are thousands of people who could benefit from the service, and you can just hand them a map. So there are tools like this out there that I just want you to be aware of. Okay. So PLA Project Outcome, which I've talked about quite a bit. This project is launching officially at a June pre-conference at ALA in San Francisco. About 65 libraries are participating in the first pre-conference. We had more than 100 libraries asked to be included. So PLA, almost immediately after ALA, will be offering more training and bringing more libraries in. This is really to onboard libraries with assessment using the tool that I showed you earlier, the one survey, but in a series of the 7 category surveys. And then moving people through how do I collect the data, how do I use the data, and so on. So it'll be a whole toolkit for you. And then they'll be onboarding more and more libraries very aggressively over the next 3 years. It's a project that's been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so PLA could really move this forward more quickly. Also at PLA was a project several years ago called Turning the Page, and this is an advocacy tool. All of the resources in the advocacy tool are free. So I encourage you to look at this, and what this tool does is it helps you take data that you already have. So all of the information that we've talked about already around outputs and outcomes, you collect that and you have a story, but you're not quite sure how to present it. This resource has the templates, and you can just plug the data in and tell your story. So it really gives you good sets of templates to train yourself in areas that you may need some skill development. Okay. The U.S. Impact Survey, there's quite a lot going on out there, I'm sorry. Around assessment, there's just a lot happening. The U.S. Impact Survey, many of you may have participated in this a while ago. This is the 2nd round of impact studies, and this is truly an outcomes assessment. This series of surveys are designed to ask the patron how they are using your public computers, your databases, the web links that you have, all of that, to inform their educational process. It might be, I want to register to vote. It may be I need health information. It may be I want to take a class, or I just want to learn something new as a hobby. All of that information is being captured, again, through the patron. So this is truly an outcome project, not an output project, but outcomes, because the patrons are telling you through this tool how well you're meeting their needs across a series of topical areas. If you haven't looked at this ever, I encourage you to look at this website and see what tools are available. They're currently enlisting libraries who want to join and actually engage in this and run the survey at their location. So I encourage you to have a look at this. We talked a little bit about LibQual Plus already. This is a project sponsored by the Association of Research Libraries. It's been in place for many years, probably 15 or more. They have a series of surveys that are used, but primarily this is a gap analysis tool that helps libraries understand the difference between the service that the libraries are providing and the perceived value to the student or faculty. Very important, again, all online. Some additional resources, which are print, they're books, paper books, bound. There are three that I wanted to highlight only because I feel like I was a little short on the academic side today, primarily because academic libraries report, at the national level, report their data through IPEDS, which is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education System. It's a survey series that's administered by the Department of Education through the National Center for Education Statistics. Survey series has been in place for a very long time. Libraries, academic libraries had been in the series. They were removed around 2000, 2001. They were removed from the series, and this year they're back in. So this is the first year that academic libraries are back in the IPED series, but the number of questions that are being captured are seriously reduced. So it's really critical to understand that on the academic side that you're probably better relying on the data you collect yourselves and if you're a research library and are a member of ARL, those data that you're recording. Also, ACRL has a survey that they're phasing out, but they're a bit of a gap there for academic libraries, and I apologize. For those of you who are just starting outcomes assessment, I encourage you to look at the Demonstrating for Results book by Ray Joyce, and it's a great primer. Sorry, Ray Joyce Rubin. It's a great primer. It's part of the Public Library Association results series, measuring for results, counting on results, planning for results. This is demonstrating results using outcome measurement in your library. Takes you step by step through a series of tools. I encourage you to look at this if this is an area that's new to you. It's very easy to read. Very recently, 2 books published by Joe Matthews and others are the Managing with Data. This one helps libraries understand if you're using the data that you report, if you're an academic library, that you're reporting to ACRL, or if you're using the data that you report, if you're a public library and you report in the PLA series, how to actually use those data and use the data sets that are available to you. Again, they're output measures. They're not outcomes. They're outputs. But if you want to understand where you rank compared to other libraries, this book will help you understand how to actually manage that data and use it more effectively. And finally, a book by Peter Hernan and Ellen Altman and Robert Dugan is Assessing Service Quality, Satisfying the Expectations of Library Customers. This is about outcomes. This book actually helps you walk through that. It's in its 3rd edition. They've made a series of improvements to the book, bringing a lot of the examples up to date and newer tools that are available for libraries, and I encourage you to have a look at that. I'm not pushing ALA as a publisher. It's just so happens these are where the books are, and I apologize. But some things that you should be thinking about very seriously. So this concludes my presentation. We've got almost a half hour to take questions, and that's what my hope was, that I would leave enough time for that. So I'm done.
So far there's one question from Susanna Gall, and she just wants to know if the slides will be available and the webinar will be archived, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with information where you can link to the recording and to the slides.
Yes, and I'd say too that there are a couple of other resources that I want to link to, so I'm going to be modifying this last slide with a few more resources, among them a report that was completed by the Association of Research Libraries that as part of their planning activities. So that'll be added to this as well.
Elaine Provenzano said, "Thank you. This has been very helpful."
Well, I'm glad. And if you have questions, I guess they could be forwarded to me. I'd be more than happy to respond to any questions after you've had some time to go through things and poke around a bit in the presentation.
Yeah, and we do have 10 more minutes allotted, so if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them in.
This is Mary Carroll. I guess I can still speak, right? And you're hearing me?
Yes.
I'm just so still adjusting to go to webinar. I forgot to mention that we have forums set up, and I think that they'll be pretty easy to register. And for now, if you go to the SCRLC website, www.scrlc.org, and kind of in the upper left-hand corner, you can click on forums, and we have a whole set of forums set up for assessment, and it's for the library community to continue the discussion about assessment. And so if you have questions or eureka moments that you would like to share or ask, we're going to see how that format works for such things.
And Karen Shockey says, regarding turning the page, does this provide the infographics needed to present your story? Do you have more information as to how to create infographics to present the data?
Both Turning the Page and the EDGE initiative in their toolkit have infographics, and my understanding also the U.S. impact study in this next iteration, because they've done their testing and that product is now being launched nationally. There are also infographic tools there. And also in the digital inclusion, I know it's a little complicated because it's place by place, in the digital inclusion research with John Berteau, they have examples of infographics that you can use using the digital inclusion data. So, the Turning the Page has infographics, the EDGE initiative, digital inclusion, and also the U.S. impact. Each of them have examples of that. I would probably start with the Turning the Page and the EDGE initiative because they are the most current and the broadest in terms of templates for infographics. I also know that with the PLA Project Outcome, infographic kits will be part of that, and that will be available in June.
Any other questions? Karen says thank you, Denise.
Oh, just welcome.
And Carl says, thank you, I love infographics. And Kathy Michael is asking, is there a repository of college and research library surveys?
Yes, there are two places where you can link to, not so much a repository. Okay, I'm going to think aloud here. So the National Information Standards Organization, NYSO, has a working group for library statistics. And it's Z39.7. And in that tool is an online data tool that links you to the questions that are in each of the surveys, national surveys. So the ARL, the ACRL, IPEDS are linked there. In addition, to the extent possible, where there is a link, where we could link to the international standards surveys to academic libraries, we've included those as well. So you can get it at a definitional level. You can get at that through the NYSO standard, again, Z39.7. ALA, through their research office and their professional library, they keep an inventory on their website of surveys to academic, K through 12, and public library, and to some extent special library questionnaires. And you should be able to find that through the research component of, if you just search research, Office for Research under ALA, you should be able to get to the links that take you to those surveys. So they try to maintain that so that there is an inventory. But if you, so overall surveys, just a snapshot, go to the ALA page. If you want to know at the definitional level what data elements are being collected, the quickest way is to go through the NYSO standard.
Great, and Kathy says thank you. Any other questions out there? Well, I'd like to invite
Well, Denise,
everybody. Oh, go ahead, Mary Carol.
No, go ahead, Jessica.
I just wanted to make sure to invite everybody to the next webinar in the series, which is Communicating the Library's Value with Zsuzsa Colte, and that's on May 15th from 10 to 11:15 a.m., and you can find the details at scrlc.org.
Thanks, Jessica. And I just wanted to extend my thanks to Denise. And I think you've given us a good start and some process and some next steps. And I truly appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. This was a pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Denise, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So have a good afternoon, and I will now end today's webinar.
Muted.